Hi, folks, and welcome to today's event. I am Chris Ye, the co-author of Blitzscaling. I'm delighted to be moderating a panel which asks the question, are we working at home forever? And boy, on a day like this, where in the Bay Area there is no sun and the sky has literally been darkened by wildfires, I do think that this question really seems to make a lot of sense. Now, we are joined today by an all-star panel of experts who are going to be able to share their opinions with us. We're going to have a great discussion. We're going to make time at the end for your questions as well. So feel free to use the Q&A feature in Zoom if you wish to go ahead and enter your questions at any point in time. We're going to save them all for the end, but you can feel free to enter your questions at any time. So without further ado, let me go ahead and kick things off and introduce our fantastic panel. Gary, why don't we start with you? Tell the folks about yourself.
So I actually have three hats that I spin constantly. I'm the chair for the future of work with Singularity University, which is a global community and think tank based here in Silicon Valley. So I'm also experiencing the orange skies that Chris and MANSI are. I have a consulting company called KShaped, where we dive in on a range of projects with corporations and country leaders. And then, because there's not enough time in the day, we also have a software company called eParachute that's built from the work of a book called What Color is Your Parachute, which is sort of the world's enduring career manual. So we've got the macro view on future of work and learning in organizations with Singularity, diving into projects with KShaped, and then we know how people change work and learning in their lives.
Well, I think that is going to be excellent background for the discussion we have. Next up in what we were discussing before we began as what we could call the Hollywood Squares or the Brady Bunch grid of Zoom windows. I'm hoping that somebody who is a millennial or Gen Z person will let us know if those references are completely outdated. But next in the grid is Dan. Dan, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, yeah, my name is Danwoldridge, and I'm the strategic leadership advisor for a company called the API Group. And we're a holding company that owns nearly 40 businesses across North America in the construction services sector of the construction industry. So it's very diverse, from life safety to infrastructure to energy. And my role is to advise our portfolio of companies on their leadership and strategy matters. And one of the critical issues that we're facing today is obviously the issue of talent and work, as we're challenged in a lot of different geographies and a lot of different types of businesses. I'm in Minneapolis today, which is the home of API Group, but I hail from Colorado, where I escaped record highs over the weekend down to almost record lows and snow yesterday. So we're living in kind of a really disruptive weather pattern ourselves out in Colorado.
Well, I'm glad to hear that you managed to escape the blizzard. It was crazy, from heat wave to blizzard in one day. It's pretty remarkable. Next up in our grid, coming to us from his car, is Bill. Bill, can you introduce us? Can you also tell us the make and model of your car?
So, Bill Emmick, I'm a professor of management and innovation at Columbia University. My car is my love of my life, or one of the loves of my life. It's a 2005 Mercedes S230 with 175,000 miles on it, but it still motors pretty good. So, yeah, I love it. So I also serve on the board of a company called IX, which is, our tagline is Profit with a Purpose. It's a platform company that was modeled actually after Berkshire Hathaway. My co-author of my recent book, Social Value Investing, is Howard Buffett, the grandson of Warren Buffett. So that's part of where we got the idea. And one of the big items in our company is an innovative company called Multigreen, which does workforce housing with sustainability and with an idea of creating a full community of various incomes and professions and the like. So that'll do for now.
Fantastic. And last but not least, but the person who, due to a mishap with Zoom, ended up in the wrong Zoom first and therefore joined last. MANSI, tell us about yourself.
Hi, Chris. Well, the first thing I want you to know is this is the first time I've worn makeup in months, so thank you for this opportunity.
Me too.
And that's pretty exciting today. I am an ex-techie of sorts. I spent almost 20 years in the startup and .com world. Well, companies grew up from AOL, eBay, Google. I used to head up product policy at Google, and then I did a hard pivot into leadership coaching, partly because of struggles that I was experiencing as a corporate leader. Had, some family members in end of life, and was exploring how to be resilient through that, and fell in love with that work. So that's what I do now. I've been working in the famous touchy-feely class at the Graduate School of Business at Stanford. It is fantastic. And so really I take an EQ approach to interpersonal dynamics and leadership. And I wouldn't call that an expertise so much as something that I continually practice. I'm a practitioner.
Well, I think we're all lifelong learners at this point. I think that anyone who thought they knew what 2020 was going to be like back in January, clearly lifelong learning and adapting to the circumstances is really important. And that's a great place to start. Let's set the stage. Obviously, we've been going through a lot this year. Some people even called it the Great Reset. So what exactly is happening in the world, and what does this mean for us? Gary, why don't you lead us off, since you were the first guy introduced?
So back in March, when I think we were all sort of going through this biblical period of just trying to understand the impact on our industries, our organizations, our societies, and our lives, I wrote a piece called The Great Reset. And what I was basically trying to frame was, if you look at some of these big whacks to the side of the head that we've had in the past, including the Great Recession, they sort of went through three reasonably predictable phases. There's a phase one that's sort of falling off the cliff, and with the Great Recession, that was several years. There's a riffling along the bottom as you're trying to put the pieces back together, and then there's hopefully an afterwards where you're actually rebuilding. And so what I said was, I think this is not just a pause, but it's actually a reset. And we're going to see that reset in a range of different arenas. But the first ones we're going to see are going to be in places like how and where we work, how and where we learn. Place-based businesses are going to go through a really significant reset. And so, so there's a range of new strategies and capacities that leaders of organizations especially we're going to need. And now that we're in many economies around the world, we're in phase two, where we're trying to turn the lights back on. Oh, no, turn the lights back off. That sort of thing. The rules are changing constantly. We need yet another new skill set of leadership and human work.
Got it. Well, it certainly describes the kind of life we're living right now. It has certainly changed a lot. And I guess the question will be, when do we expect this reset to take place? Like, when do folks think that the world is going to start to recover from this pandemic? Is it going to be next year? Is it going to be 2022? When should we be looking to think about, okay, this is the new normal? Bill, you've got an academic perspective. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's hard to tell where we are, actually, whether we're at the beginning, the middle, or the end. One school of thought says once we get a vaccine and maybe a change in leadership in Washington, that by next spring, things will be like they were, like this never happened. I think that's unlikely because there were already trends emerging that I think this experience will exacerbate. Telemedicine is one, which has been exploding in the US, in China, in India. Online education also had a start, and now that's been exploding. And I wrote a piece about a month and a half ago called The 4-Day Work Week. It's hard to imagine this, but really we have been in the 5-day work week since the time of Henry Ford. almost 100 years ago, we went from 6 days as the norm to 5. And we've been pretty much stuck there for most typical offices ever since. I think one of the major changes we'll see happening is a move toward perhaps a 4-day work week, and maybe one of those days online. In fact, one of my former students is mayor of a fairly large city outside of New York, Jersey City. They negotiated an agreement with their civil service union to make that a reality for their new contract. But it'll be 4 days spread over 7, which is an interesting thing as well.
I was going to say, so, I mean, when we say 4-day work week, do you mean like, oh, everyone's going to get Friday off or Monday off? Or is it more like we have a weekend and then Wednesdays people have off? What's it going to be like?
Well, I think it's going to be more like, I served as deputy fire commissioner in New York, fire and EMS. The organization is open 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. But the individuals work all sorts of shifts. And I think we can see the same kind of thing here and in other places. For example, in Finland, they have required employers to allow employees to come in at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, and 10 o'clock for almost a decade. So I see staggered work times, which again will allow the organization to be open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. So it'll be better for customers and consumers. And I would argue if you do it right, it'll be better for everybody, because people have children, people have elders, people have all sorts of needs. And if we use algorithms and our big data and analytic capacity, we could actually benefit all workers, or most workers, most employers, and perhaps most importantly, most customers.
Well, it's definitely pretty exciting. I mean, I think about work transforming, and that's definitely one way it's transformed. The other way it's transformed, which we recognize because of this panel we're on right now, is that so much of it's being done remotely. I mean, Bill, I think you mentioned before we started, you're teaching all your classes remotely. Your students are not there in the classroom with you. You're teaching from your office. Is that right?
Well, so at Columbia right now, Harvard is all online. We are what we call hybrid flex. So 80% of the courses are totally online. 20% are online, recorded, but also have live students in the room. And that's been a new world for me. And it's complicated, but it may become the new normal. We'll see.
So let me just make sure I understand this. So you pre-record a lecture and then it's played in the room? No. Okay.
It's live, just like it used to be, but it's being recorded as it's live. And
they're the live studio audience.
Yeah, like this, you record this, right? So people can come to the class. Obviously, you have to have reservations and the like, but people can come. They can stay at home in China and watch it there live, or maybe they're a sleeper at work for the next week, or depending on the professor for the whole semester, they could watch it whenever they feel like.
So this is how Sebastian Thrun started Udacity. He started doing this at Stanford.
Yep.
And realized that he wasn't quite the scintillating lecturer that he thought he was, because he had a 50% drop off in his classroom. But what he found was that there were students, every single student who watched it after the fact went back, rewound to at least one point. And there was one student that watched one segment 60 times. And what he realized is, well, so that's the learning mode. You need to be able to incorporate a range of different learning modes for your students. And the straight linear lecture is just one.
Yeah.
Now, part of the remoteness of this, again, it must be very different in terms of connecting with the students, but that's a reflection of the fact that we're human beings. We're not machines. And working remotely is obviously very different from being in person. And one of the things is not just the productivity, but the emotional side. And MANSI, you're talking about the EQ elements of it. So how do we manage to be high EQ when we can't actually see anyone in person?
Yeah, I think it takes more effort and much more intentionality. You know, remote is not going to replace in person, and we're not wired for it to do so. Like right now, I'm looking at you all, but really I'm just looking at a flat screen. And that's not how we would be engaging if we were in a room together, right? We would look off to the side, or we tend to switch our attention, and this kind of narrow focus has a physiological effect that we're just not wired for. It's much more exhausting, right? So, you know, some things that we've been playing around with leaders that I coach or in the various programs at GSB is, first of all, like I think smaller meetings and shorter meetings. I can actually see your faces right now. There's 5 or 6 of us on this. That's not going to happen with 20-person meetings, right? There's like tiny boxes on Zoom that just doesn't work the same. You can't read social cues. You can't respond and interact the same way. And to really, I think, maximize all the stuff that we can do asynchronously so that we're actually maximizing these meetings for what they're really about, which is engaging with each other. So we're not sitting there and just presenting in, you know, Gary, what you were calling that linear fashion. We don't have to do that. Read the deck beforehand. I think Amazon's been doing this for a while, like read the doc and come to the meeting having prepared, and then making that meeting really effective, much more focused. Is there a clear agenda, clear AIs, all the kind of good meeting hygiene that we really ought to have been following, but that becomes much more important in this remote format. And then for the EQ component, I think, look, since it's not going to replace in person, I think we just have to embrace the artifice of this format. And what that looks like is making space for the overhead that EQ takes. That means let's do check-ins. Like, let's actually go around and talk to each other like people, what's happening in your lives. I mean, Chris, you've got a fantastic background that I don't think is your home.
No, it is not.
You know, what's the argument? Why did you choose that one? I think ways that we can actually connect that no doubt have an artifice about them that matter. And these are things that were already coming up. You know, Vivek Murthy, the previous Surgeon General of the US, has been talking about for at least, I don't know, 6+ years that I can think of a loneliness epidemic in America. So this situation that we're in is not something that's radical, but I think it's brought sharper focus to some existing cracks and fractures like that. So we already needed to form these connections, and he implemented that when he was Surgeon General because of his personal experience, kind of like what I was alluding to in my intro, that, you know what, I need to actually make an effort, a conscious, intentional effort for this engagement. So really what that comes down to is building safety and trust. And that has 2 components. Competence as a professional, right? You establish your competence. And the other is vulnerability as a person. And now, instead of just letting that happen organically, we're going to have to do it intentionally with prompts and check, that kind of stuff. Yeah. And I would say, let's get off the screen when we can. If it's one-on-ones, do them walking, do a few video conferences to get to know each other and have a sense of each other, and then get on the phone and get outside and move your body.
But wait until after this particular panel is over before you do any of that. Definitely stay on for the time being. Now, I'm very curious. I mean, since we're talking about this EQ side of things, like, what's everyone else's experience? Are you doing things to promote those emotional connections? Are there places where you feel like you're losing that emotional connection? It's concerning you. What's happening in your lives?
You know, Chris, MANSI makes a great point on EQ. We've got 12, 15,000 people distributed across the country, and we're used to working physically together in the construction industry. And so the distribution of this has really made a lot of those connections really difficult. So MANSI, to your point, we've been instituting a lot of practices and introducing people to practices of how to check in with other people, you know, in kind of a holistic way, you know, to be able to ask, how are you doing? really, how are you doing? And then having space in our meetings where people can talk and understand that that kind of vulnerability and authenticity is not only important, it's healthy, and it really helps the whole team as I think, issues of engagement are really becoming problematic as people are distributed and shut away from each other and don't have the usual kind of contact. So I appreciate what you're doing, and we're, even though we're kind of an old and staid industry, we're trying to kind of deal with that. And when you think about construction workers and kind of the whole attitude of the manliness and all of that sort of stuff, breaking through this has been really critical. And I think it really hit home a couple of weeks ago when a person that we didn't even expect, that you would expect it of, took his own life in the midst of this. And so I think it really sent kind of a shockwave through the organization and say, this is really important now more than ever.
I want to add, I think, a point to each, MANSI and what Dan just said. So, so MANSI, in addition to I've talked for some time about sort of what the responsibility of leaders in these times are, and I've talked about competence and compassion. So I think and then I add a third, courage. Is we see the most courageous leaders are the ones that had to make some pretty tough decisions early on, especially in the first phase of the Great Reset, where they had to make some pretty tough calls in terms of what their employees needed to do. There's obviously we're talking about physical risk now in a way that we often didn't in most industries before. And the most courageous leaders that were the ones that actually made some pretty strong calls. But if there's anything to Dan's point that we've seen with leaders that we end up working with is this is a wake-up call for culture. If you're existing, culture is nothing but the aggregate of behaviors of people in your organization, and especially those behaviors that are encouraged and discouraged. I mean, that's essentially what culture is, right? And so it's a wake-up call. If you had a culture that really was focused on adaptability, resilience, inclusion, I'm not saying that you shrugged this off, but you were much more prepared to be able to adapt, to be able to pivot, to be able to deal with a lot of the uncertainty which characterizes this sort of phase 2 of the Great Reset. But it's a wake-up call. If you didn't have those things, if you were not already doubled down on culture, then everything you're talking about, Dan, is a wake-up call in terms of looking at what you do now, the kinds of behaviors you encourage. And if there's anything I hope we take away now that we're looking literally into each other's homes and in one instant cars, that we're seeing the human side of us now reflected in ways that we never, we actually didn't even incorporate in many corporate cultures before. And that's one of the things I not only hope we don't lose, to the point of authenticity, I hope that we authentically keep that baked into our conception of building a more human-centric future of work.
And I do think that, one of the things that I comment to people is when I've talked to someone, I was just having a socially distanced stroll with a young friend of mine with masks through this apocalyptic landscape. And he was saying, well, I don't know, do I actually need to be here in Silicon Valley? I mean, I have all these relationships with folks. And I said, those are relationships that you built in person. Right now, to a large extent, we're coasting on the culture that we built and the relationships that we built in person. And I guess one of the questions I would have is, are people able to build those new relationships? What's happening with new employees that are being onboarded onto teams? How do we overcome these barriers since we're going to be living this environment for at least a little while longer?
So we, in our organization, we added 2 senior people over the course of the height of the pandemic. And recruitment was challenging. All the interviews were via Zoom. Big decisions to make about people who are part of the executive team. We made them, they're on board. It's still too soon to tell how this will last. We all seem to like each other, right? But we've never touched each other. We've never been in the same room together. And as I talk to people who are older CEOs of companies, many of them are saying, as soon as I can, this is over. people are coming back because I don't think, this is anecdotal for the most part. I don't think a lot of people are working like they should be working. I don't really feel like I can control people in this environment. Yeah, the people who are the go-getters, the backbreakers, maybe they're working more than they did before. But the average to the lower half, I don't trust them. And you even hear some of that from tech companies who maybe 3 or 4 months ago were saying, I can imagine no one being in the office. To starting to say, well, I don't know. So I think there is going to be a pendulum swinging back a little to the old way of doing. It's not going to swing all the way back, and maybe it'll swing back in the middle again. Too soon to tell, I think, right now.
I'm curious about other people's comments, especially one of the things that you mentioned, Bill, is talking about the old school CEOs. Is there going to be a generation gap of some kind as well? Do the different generations view this differently? Who wants to jump in on that?
I'd love to jump in on that because I think the comments that are coming up are tying together several different threads for me, which is, culture as the aggregate of behaviors for sure, but also like the story that we tell ourselves about who we are. And that came up, Dan, in your comment about, construction workers and men operating in a certain way and trying to break through that to offer support and a new way of looking. And I'm hearing it, Bill, in what you're saying about CEOs and the story that they have about the ways in which people are working. But one of the reasons that I think that generational component that you're pointing to, Chris, is really important because what I haven't really been hearing a lot about is thinking about, hey, this great reset, what does this look like for the future of work for the people who are in kindergarten and elementary school and high school and college right now, who are up in this period right now that we're going through, where we're coasting on pre-existing relationships, but they're missing out maybe depending on the age group and building some of those social skills. Those people are going to be in the workforce. And the stories that they are telling themselves, that their parents are trying to help them form about who they are, that's not going to fit as well. And on the one hand, there's a trajectory there that we don't necessarily have to get into right now about leadership needing to understand and be more trauma sensitive in what we're going to need to understand about the workplace as those generations enter the workforce. But the other part is also work is going to look different because I hate to be like, I feel like I sound like the killjoy when I say this to my friends. But my fear and also not like a anxiety fear, but just trying to brace myself and be prepared is not that 2020 is the worst year we've ever had, but what if it's the best year we're gonna have for a while? Because what we're not talking about on this call is climate crisis, right? Like the pandemic is one thing, but the orange sky is coming from somewhere else, and that's not going to change. There's a physical reality to the ecological system that we live in, which means that I think work and leadership is going to happen in more continual crisis mode than we have experienced in certainly my lifetime, and probably most of our lifetimes in this call. So that's going to look different. It is going to look different, that people are not going to be able to operate at what we tell ourselves is 100 or 110% capacity and productivity and those modes of being from Henry Ford's time. That may not be what the 21st century really looks like when we're dealing with fires and tornadoes and that kind of stuff in much more perpetual and the underlying inequities that surfaces also for us as a society, that we're seeing it all in 2020, and it's not going to go away just with the pandemic ending.
Absolutely, and I think I want to just add in, so we've got age differences. I mean, look at what we've put young people through: 9/11, the Great Recession, the Great Reset. I mean, just the mentality around impermanence. you know, just wait, just when is the next one? Just tell me. It's, you know, what is it? Artificial general intelligence? Is it it's a generalized AI, or what? You know, what's the next whack in the side of the head? But we also have. I want to make sure we're not forgetting that there is a range of different work roles that actually don't have this luxury. There's more than, 34% of work roles actually demand in person, I've got a chart that shows the least paid people that are in leisure and hospitality, retail trade, health services, in many cases, transportation and warehousing. Those are the people who must be in person, on site, doing something. They're the lowest paid. And what we've seen over and over again in each of these whacks that we've had in the past is they're the ones that are already more disadvantaged. They become even more disadvantaged. We get a growing gap in wages, in permanence in work, and so on. And so, and those are also typically younger people. So what's critical in phases like this is that we just double down. The talk about building companies that are more focused on purpose, the discussion of organizations that retain much more of the practices around human centricity. All of these things are critical, and we have to make sure that our economies are designed in ways that help to benefit those who are least advantaged going forward.
Yeah, and one of the things I would say is, I think we've been reading now, and the numbers are coming out, that we're actually experiencing a K-shaped recovery, where high wage earners, those earning above $60,000 a year, unemployment is relative to pre-pandemic down about 1%, whereas for low wage earners, down 15%. And Dan, you're helping run a massive construction endeavor that includes a lot of people who have to work in person. Right. What are you seeing out there, and what are you doing about it?
Yeah, no, those are great questions, and you've already alluded to some of the things that we're thinking about, MANSI and Gary. I think one is that we've embraced more of a purpose-driven culture, and really the purpose of the company really is about building great leaders. And when we talk about great leaders, we're not just talking about executives, but helping people embrace their own leadership, whether they're a solo contributor or not. And part of that, then I think that when we're thinking about recruiting, we've been recruiting and hiring at almost the same pace as pre-pandemic, because our work has been unabated, because most of everything we do is critical services. But when 3/4 of your workforce actually works in the field, they don't have the luxury of working in their pajamas from home. And so I think that one of the things that we're seeing is that we have to actually create a safe place, support them through the traumas that they're feeling at home, because a lot of times they don't have the ability to stay at home or have the option. And then what we've done is that we've really begun to think, really the front line of our organization is the bottom line. So how do we help these people who, in the course of their career, can handle billions of dollars worth of work, but have never been given business training, never been given leadership development training, never been taught how to interact with the customers, and to help them really rethink the way they operate, what their job really is, and understand the value that they really create. And we were already underway on this 5 or 6 years before the pandemic, but now we're seeing more than ever that it's been the resilience and kind of a new level of professionalism that's been developed in them that's helped us really keep rising through this, and we've protected their jobs. And so our job as leaders really then is to create the safety, this resilience. And I think even though I know that we've had an unusual number of crises that have hit us, in the last 20 years, I don't think that that's unusual at other points in time in history. You know, because I can think of my grandmother that went through the early flu pandemic, World War I, World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, you know, the civil rights movement, all in one lifetime. And so I think, though, that what's happened is that the way we've managed organizations has kind of slowly tried to control people and squeeze the basic resilience and spirit out of people, and then turn them into kind of just hired hands rather than a whole person. And I think that as we focus on developing the whole person and creating an organization where there's safety and there's an unleashing of that potential, I think that we can discover a resilience in our people that maybe they didn't believe that they had, which will help us get through the future things that we'll be facing. So that's kind of our hope and our approach in a 90-year-old company that's in an industry that continually ranks last in embracing technological improvement and trying to bring it forward, you know, into the future and through all of this. And we're seeing that it can be done.
And I think that's really one of the answers to the big question that you asked, MANSI, which is, what do we do if 2020 is just the beginning and not the end? And when you're hearing a 90-year-old company in a very traditional industry like yours, Dan, making changes to be human-centered, as Gary's sort of discussing, and making changes to be more resilient, I think that's pretty inspiring.
And can I comment on that? Because I was really excited, Dan, to hear you use the word spirit. You know, I just don't think we use that word in corporate lexicon enough, because it evokes and alludes to something ineffable about being human that just fundamentally is resilient. And, you know, when I think about like the groups of construction workers that you're talking about, the front line who are the bottom line, they know they're in this, they're doing this. Those groups of people know what they need. And I think one of the things that in that command and control model of leadership that we've gotten used to, that we've missed out on, is actually listening to the front line and the bottom line that does know. And that, I think, is going to be one of the big shifts that we need when it comes to leadership and culture, is to not be as top down, but to be much more networked. That brings resilience, and to actually like listen to each other in a way where we're amplifying the qualities, the courage that we have, or you know, all there's these beautiful human spirit qualities that actually can't emerge when there's that command and control model. Right. So, you know, a couple of the things that I see happening with that is thinking more about the collective and not about just the individual heroic model of leadership, kind of going from the Captain America to the Avengers. Like, you know, it's not about who's going to be the boy wonder or the boy genius or girl genius. Captain Marvel, would also not be the great model, although I was very happy to see that movie, obviously. But the network, the group. So are we recognizing teams and groups of people, not just awarding individuals, you know?
That's right. No, I think,
just,
go ahead. Just to build on that, I think that, you know, you think about people in the field and how rough and tumble they may seem. And I think to the points that you all are making, we've been bringing hundreds up to the mountains in Colorado for a week at a time. And really the focus has been on their own self-awareness, learning about emotional intelligence, learning about communication, learning about the human aspects of running a team, and not just being kind of drivers of results and, you know, price and schedule. And I can't tell you the number of people that would come there thinking, I don't think I should be here, but at the end of the week are leaving in tears. And they're saying, it's not only going to help me in my work, but I understand also why I may be losing my family, and now I know what to do. And so I think that that's a leadership role that we need to own and embrace to serve, I think, these many people that we really respect and love.
And it can be done. you know, it's not an example from the private sector, but the fire service is very much a model like that. These are people who work 24/7 in the most dangerous physical situations in the world, risk their lives to save not only other people, but their property. And those people, you can't get them to retire. When I worked there full time, there'd be 80-year-old people walking around the hallway. Say, who's that? Oh, that's John Jones. He retired 25 years ago, but he still comes to work every day. So, but I would say a couple of things as lessons across the board from the fire service is schedules are based on individuals for the most part. So there are opportunities to have a job that pays well and also have a life, because we have enough people to serve our customers and yet give people a life. That's one thing. Secondly, as many of you said, it's a lot of midstream and lower stream management. Management really on the fire ground is by the chief who's there, who's a person who's 7, 8, 10 steps below the commissioner. But that person makes those tactical decisions right on the fire scene. And one of the things we did after 9/11 is create a program where literally the top 16 up-and-comers are ready when they move. So training is critical.
Bill, you're breaking up a bit. So
Schedules and giving and decentralizing. Sorry, am I back?
you're back. You're back.
I'm also finished. So it's good.
Perfect.
You just wanted to show us an example of what can happen on a Zoom call, so we
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Very important. We're starting to run low on time before we get to Q&A. So I did want to get one other of my set questions out there, because we exist in a world where so much is going on. And in addition to a pandemic, in addition to an economic crisis, we also have a racial justice movement. We have the protests in the wake of the police killing of George Floyd, and now the shooting of Jacob Blake. The NBA held a strike in order to draw more attention to this. So issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion during this time are so important and becoming more and more prominent. How should leaders be dealing with all of these things at once?
All at once, huh?
All at once. Somehow life has not chosen to hit us with one thing at a time in a convenient package.
Can we do that one tomorrow? No, Chris, I think that's such an important question. One of the things that I think about when it comes to what you're talking about in terms of racial justice, diversity, equity, inclusion questions is, when does business not play a part in those questions? I mean, the East India Company is a critical component of colonialism, had an army that was 250,000 strong and bigger than the British Army positioned in India. So, I mean, I'm Indian, that my grandfather fought for freedom. He was born in 1926 and is my primary parent. He's 94 today. Not today, he's already 94 in May, and knock on wood, very robust. But, I feel that very personally growing up in India with my grandfather. So, when I think about racial justice or social justice and how it relates to corporate leadership, business leadership, I don't see them as separate or even adjacent. They are historically intimately intertwined. So I think the question that business leaders need to be asking themselves is not whether or not they play a part. It's what part are they already playing? And in the past, and arguably also currently, the part that they're playing is to benefit from injustice. And the choice that people have as leaders is to play a role in redressing and restoring justice. That's really the question before us. It's not it's not whether business plays a role, it's what role is business choosing to play. And like American history, we sort of all know and can look at how that's played out across the world. government paving the way for business interests and so on. Right now, that's what we're seeing in our streets. That's what we're seeing in corporate hallways and even on Zoom calls, right? Like people are talking about, when they're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, diversity and inclusion are just stepping stones to that key central word, which is equity. And that's what people really want. And how that acronym, like, DEI sort of came up after I left Google. It was barely starting to enter the lexicon in 2013, 2014. It was really all just for diversity. We're talking about unconscious bias and diversity. And then like 2-3 years later, it was inclusion. You know what? Now equity is kind of sandwiched in there in the middle, but that's really the heart of it. People want equity. And businesses have to ask themselves, what are their values in that? And for me, I can say that it means a lot more to hear leaders say, this is not important to us right now because we're focused on profit. That has more integrity for being really transparent about where they stand on these matters than to put out some kind of bland statement or try to address it in some milquetoast way. And the other side of the spectrum is what I love what Ben and Jerry's did. I think it's no accident that Darren Dodson is on their board. I think he's amazing. I've met him through the GSB. They put out a statement that was really bold. It said, dismantle white supremacy. They didn't go with Black Lives Matters, we stand by. No, they were like, this is white supremacy, we want to dismantle it, and you should read their statement if you haven't already. It was very powerful and potent. So I think there's a very intimate connection. Private equity assets under management globally, 98% by white men. That matters. This is already a part of business. So
I want to just
stop there and get fired up, you can tell.
absolutely. I just want to draft on that. So back to the courage thing. So you're exactly right. I mean, first off, this all needs to be done in an authentic manner. And I think we tend to sort of fool ourselves in thinking we could just do press releases and we're inclusive, right? So a couple of things. So first off, yes, I think it's wonderful when somebody says that their profit motive is what drives them. But the truth is, we know what the results you're going to get if you keep on, following the line of our peculiar form of capitalism. So if you look around at your board meeting and what you see are people that all look like you, I don't care what else you're doing throughout your organization, you have not sent any of the signals to the organization that you're committed to any of this kind of change. If you only have your shareholders as your major stakeholders and everybody else is way, way down on the list, you're going to get the results that you have. And if you feel that you have shareholders that can support you having a broader range of stakeholders, you're going to do very courageous things. And if you don't, you won't. And then authentically throughout the organization, if you don't deeply change the way you have managers specify what work roles are. You don't change your hiring practices. You don't change your development practices. If you don't authentically do that throughout the entire organization, again, I don't care what kind of lipstick you put on the process, you're not going to get the results that you're talking about. Your organization will keep on doing the same things that it does because, as we said, your culture is going to simply reinforce the behaviors that it always reinforced in the past. And that's what success looked like in your organization. You have to change that calculus to have effective change.
All right, last question before we open it up fully to Q&A. And this is a question, if you can, I'd like everyone to take a stab at and give an answer for, which is, let's imagine it's 2025 and we're looking backwards now. What's changed about work in the past 5 years? And this could be what you predict or what you would like to see or both. So what's going to be different in 2025, looking back?
Let me jump in because I have one coda to the last discussion. Is I'd urge people to look at what's going on in the NBA right now in terms of real steps to make change. Including setting up 2 new organizations. One, a foundation to put money behind the right effort, and 2, a lobbying organization that will be separate and apart from, but funded by the NBA. So 2, I think, important points. For me, I think on your second question, I think what we're going to look back on is seeing a really redefinition of when people work, how people work, and how organizations deal with workers. as more as partners and stakeholders, which several of you mentioned. I think I'm very optimistic about that, because I think in the end, people will realize if you really treat your workers as stakeholders and your customers as stakeholders, you'll make more money. So that's my observation.
Fantastic. Who's next?
Sure, I'll dive in. So we're going to look back, and we're going to see we actually changed a range of different things related to the context of work, where we work, when we work. We've broken the seal on what I call management by surveillance. And even though, Bill, I agree, there are CEOs that don't trust people in the layers of the organization, they can't see directly. I think what we did is, MANSI said this early on, it's about trust, and we've been forced to trust. So I believe that we're going to have a range of different kind of work roles. Again, I think we're going to have not just a workforce, but a network force. I think sort of the box mentality of an organization is now going to look a lot more like a network. And we're going to figure out ways to be able to manage all of those different kinds of work contexts, different kinds of skills, and hopefully double down on maximizing human potential. That's really where I think the opportunity is. But again, just to make sure, what we've done in the past is we have left behind a lot of people. We've disadvantaged a whole bunch of people that were not able to make this shift. We have got to focus on giving them the resources to continually train themselves for the new skills that need to be done. We've got to have the kinds of community commitment that ensures no human gets left behind. Because otherwise what we'll look back is we will see not just the K, there won't be a recovery for the people who are at the base of the pyramid. We're basically going to have left them behind. And so that's an opportunity. And I think we're up to the task.
Yeah, we have some stated 2025 goals that I think that kind of support these directions. I think one of the things that we want to be established in our industry is to be the #1 in leader development in the industry. And when we think about leaders, our slogan is leaders everywhere, everyone a leader. So we're not embracing a positional view of leadership, but everybody owning the influence that they have. And so to that end, and to kind of build on your concept of learning, that what we're doing is that laterally across the country, across all the different companies, across all the different positions, we're developing learning communities of practice. And we're helping every single of the 12,000 people in our company develop their own individual development plans, which is more than just kind of get new competencies and stay certified, but to really understand their gifts, their abilities, and think about their future path. And then we're all committed to one-on-one development of all of these people. We're already into our 3rd generational change of leadership at the senior levels. And so what we're doing is that we're intentionally becoming a younger company at the leadership levels, and it's not hierarchical. And I think that this generational change is also a change in kind of the picture or the makeup of the people. And so even from the recruiting and hiring and onboarding, we're having the whole new generation and a more diverse group of people do the hiring, bringing people and onboarding them. And as a result, I think that we have a really high trust organization, and that they're developing new business models that are going to adapt to, I think, that the current environment, to stay effective and to stay human-centered, and continue to just try to make a difference in the worlds in which we walk.
All right, MANSI, last word.
I'm a divergent thinker, so I will say, in addition to human-centered, I hope this will be the year that we also look at planet-centered, and we look at our economy and workplace practices as incorporating this living world that we're a part of. And so when I think about what that means is, I guess, I feel like we've been in this myth of growth and efficiency that's governed our workplace and economic cultures. And I think we've seen the limits of navigating by that value system. And I hope we move into sustainability, and not just sustainability as in, you know, what's happening with natural resources and how we actually, you know, move from an extractive, exploitative sort of model to an embedded participatory model, but also the human-centered thing that you guys are all talking about, that sustainability becomes like a inside-out full value system. And then the other part, I think, for me is care. You know, are we moving to a, like, why are we even doing this? Like, it's not just to survive, we want to thrive, right? So moving to a narrative of work as a model of care, and he was a problematic figure, but a quote that I read by Walt Disney that really struck me was, he said, "I don't make movies to make money, I make money to make movies." You know, and it's just this whole different orientation of business as a way of providing value to society, providing value to each other, whereas business as a way to make money is a way of extracting value. And I think that reorientation and I have lots of fears around whether we'll do it or not, but in the spirit of articulating the beautiful world that I hope is possible and think is possible, I hope this is when we make that pivot.
Excellent.
Here, here. Well said.
Thank you. So we have a question from Laurent. Laurent asks, and he notes, love this, so good job, guys. Laurent notes, the skill sets that matter most for leaders and managers to lead and manage in the post-COVID time are becoming different from what was enough pre-COVID. More EQ, agility, balancing empathy and accountability, etc. Can the panelists share their views on what this will mean in terms of how we select, grow, prepare new leaders and managers and supervisors in the post-COVID time? And what should we do now to prepare for this? So anyone who wants to can answer this question.
Well, I'll jump quick. I actually think one skill that everybody from Peter Drucker to any major writer, Warren Buffett, they all say, if you had to pick one skill, what would it be? What skill should I improve? They all say communication. And these days it's communicating in person, it's online, it's emotionally. I think if we could enhance one skill of current and potential leaders, it would be focusing on communication, including listening.
Well said, well said.
You know, I would build on that, and Bill, and communication always comes up. You ask people, you know, in leadership, you know, what do you want to improve on? And it's kind of like communication, and what aspect of communication particularly are we talking about? We talk about the skill of what we would just call leader's intent. And that's the ability of a leader to express very clearly the passionate driving purpose of the organization. Why does it exist? What difference does it make? And then expressing with clarity the end state that we want to achieve, that would be an expression of that purpose. And if we feel that if those are clear, you know, everything in between in terms of how to get there, rather than trying to micromanage that, you can unleash the creativity and potential of people to achieve that dream. But I think what happens a lot of times, people are not clear about where you're trying to go and what you're trying to achieve. And so if the communication on those things is clear, you create a lighthouse effect that everybody can move to. And I think that going back to Lauren's question also, we do assess for, and have been for some time now, assessing and teaching and helping leaders get feedback on their emotional intelligence and other aspects of their interaction with people. And so I think one of the skills is going to be the idea of really embedding developmental feedback skills to help people in real time not be afraid of feedback, but when you have an organization where there's a really robust but developmental and supportive feedback loop in all of our conversations, we can accelerate the development of people. And I think that then finally the third part is that in terms of the skill of skills is our ability to develop others. Our ability to pass on and develop others. You used to be, you know, you would hold on to all the secrets of your job because you thought that was job security. And now we realize that that's a real risk, that your job security is in your ability to develop and multiply others who are passionate and can do these things. And I think that'll become increasingly the premier leadership skill that you'll need.
Yeah, absolutely.
Gary, MANSI?
I'll just add briefly to that. So, and I think MANSI said this early on about teams. So if there's any place that this instantiates in the organization, it's your ability to work with teams. And so, so there's no question we want to develop every individual, but what we've done is we've unfortunately placed a whole bunch of people in management in an impossible situation, which is we took this industrial era construct of mass production and stuck humans into organizational hierarchies and basically built all of these, our models around that production. And as MANSI was saying, growth and so on. And so and productivity. And so we have to change our models, our mental models. And so for one thing, that role of that manager, that leader, whatever label we want to put on it, has to go from being the person with all the answers, the command and control person, you know, the one at the sage on the stage, to what our friend Esther Wojcicki calls the guide on the side, or the coach. Because you simply cannot channel. If you step back and you think, what is an organization? As far as I'm concerned, an organization is a vehicle for channeling human energy to create value for its stakeholders. That's really what it is. We're trying to channel human energy to create that value. And if what you're trying to do is you're trying to command and control that process, you're going to fail every time. You're not going to get the kind of results that you're looking for. And instead, you have to dial it back, and you've got to become, as Dan was saying, you've got to become, everybody's a leader in that regard. Novartis, a company we do a lot of work with, they call it unbossing. How do you step back from that role and instead design the way that you encourage? You're not the person with all the answers, you're the person with all the right questions. You're the ones, you're helping to guide the energies of a team of problem solvers. And as MANSI was saying, that's the Avengers model. That's not, they're not all Captain Americas. It's the Avengers model. They've each got a unique skill set, and you've got to have the dedication to helping them each individually to have a plan and to develop that skill set. And then as a team to be able to collaborate together to solve problems. That's the future model.
I see superheroes have even conquered management thinking. It's astonishing. MANSI, by design or chance, you were once again asked to close things out. So what do you think? What final words do you want to share with us?
I guess I want to use this word that was coming up for me when Bill was talking about, you know, the 80-year-old person who does not want to retire, and even from the front line after a lifetime. And the word that came up for me is honor. You know, when you feel honored for the work that you do, you want to do it. It lifts your spirits and gives you energy. And I think one of the things that I really hope, again, with this situation that we're in 2020, that we change, and that I think is a skill set we can develop as a collective, is honoring all of the work that it takes, the grocery store clerks, the farm workers and construction workers, people who are in those front lines and don't have the PJ's digital work. I think we failed at that. We have failed at that as a society, and there's a reason that 80-year-old firefighters want to continue coming to work, because they are honored for what they do. And for us to develop these skills, I love what Dan is saying about developmental, being resilient with real-time feedback. It's really helpful to feel trusted and honored. So I'll leave it there. I hope we honor each other, all of ourselves, more.
Well, I could hardly ask for a better way to close things off. I want to again thank our panelists, Gary, Dan, Bill, MANSI, for this incredible discussion. Of course, want to thank Spark Labs Global for sponsoring this discussion. Obviously, I think that we're all living through some turbulent times, but thanks to the wisdom you guys have shared with us today, hopefully we'll be able to do a little better job of building towards a better, more human, more spiritual, more open to all environment and economy. And I'm looking forward to reconvening in 2025 and going over what happened.
That'd be great.
You're on.
Be fun.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for showing up. Thank you, Lauren, for asking your question. And on behalf of Spark Labs Global, this is Chris Ye. Thank you for tuning in.